school board meeting will be called to order. Today we have Bub Elementary School with a showcase for today, and we have 3 students that are going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Welcome, students.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to begin with a roll call of all the trustees. Laura Blakely.
Bill Lambert.
Devin Conley.
Laura Berman. Let the record reflect that all trustees are present. Next, we move on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any trustee questions or comments regarding the agenda itself? Okay, seeing as there are none, I will move on to public comment. If you are a member of the public and you wish to speak, make a comment on the agenda itself, if you are joining us on Zoom, you may raise your hand in Zoom, press *9 on your phone. If you are in person and wish to make a public comment, you may fill out a speaker card in the back and bring it up here to the front. I see one hand up. Phone number ending in 76. We will put the timer up. Just one moment. We're having some technical difficulties, so we're going to time it using our phone. I apologize. Okay, if you are a caller ending in 76, you may unmute yourself.
Sounds like I'm unmuted. I'm starting my clock now. I'm former MVWSD trustee Stephen Nelson. This is about segregation. Why was Stevenson Transportation for Poor Kids not on this agenda? It's a sparse agenda. The district administrators informed you last year, transportation is about as important as enrollment boasts for SEDs, poor kids and their families. Free school transportation, public bus or private contractor. If you discuss public policy, if you bother asking the affected, the economically afflicted, you might collectively learn a lot. You need a transportation effort to desegregate Stevenson. It should have happened yesterday, as they say. There is money, tens of millions of dollars sitting unallocated as general fund reserves. That is the fund code where it sits. The dollars sit why SED families without private transportation don't even bother applying to Stevenson Choice. Thank you.
Thank you, former board member Nelson. Okay, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
My second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let the record reflect on a motion made by Vice President Conley and seconded by Trustee Lambert. The agenda has been approved unanimously. We'll move on to item 2, which is our we have a card for an item that is not on the agenda. Let's see, there is a part in our agenda that is for that specific opportunity to comment then. So I'll call on you when it's time. Thank you. That'll be after closed session. Thank you. So we'll move on to our school showcase. So today, welcome Bub Elementary School.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Westover, Board of Trustees. I'm so excited to be here tonight. Tonight for our presentation, our showcase at BUB, we're going to talk about the social emotional learning at BUB. We have so many activities that we're excited to talk to you about. We feel that this is a very, very valid way to have all students, staff, community members feel included, welcome, and respected at our school. My slides are, sorry. So we base it off of the castle wheel. And tonight we're going to talk about the orange, green, and yellow areas, which are the 5 areas that are well-rounded social emotional learning for students. And we're going to start with social awareness. And we are so proud to demonstrate tonight our Peace Path, which was invented by Soul Shot, which is a company that's based out of Oakland, California. And the reason that we enjoy the Peace Path at our site is because students get to resolve their conflicts peacefully. It lessens adult involvement. It empowers our students to settle their disagreements fairly, and both parties are heard. So tonight, I'm so excited to present to you Ms. Ryland, the 5th grade teacher. Our students are Nora Urshid, Harry Jackson, and Danny Lev. Come on up. Oh, and while you're watching them lead you through the Peace Path demonstration, please listen to the prompts that they're using and the sentences. They are also up here on the screen, but this is what helps the students go through a directed and open conversation while they're working out their conflict.
Tool help students use common language that is kind of for a problem, and it helps find words when we're in a position to do that, right?
All right, thank you, Nora, Danny, Harry, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Riley, for leading us through this. Thank you. So I just want to keep going with this. So through Soul Shop again, we had them at our school last year. They have different themes every year. This year we chose the theme of respecting differences, which goes along with our district, with our allyship charge that we have this year. The reason we picked respecting differences was because it will teach the kids to recognize and appreciate the things that make them unique, honor that others' likes and dislikes may differ from their own, avoid making assumptions, examine differences in their relationships, and appreciate and respect people and their differences. The next category is self-awareness. And in this category at BUB, we have a buddy bench that was donated to us by the San Jose Sharks. And on this bench, it is a safe place. Sometimes kids go there when they feel that they just need some space. Other times they go there because they really do want a friend and they may not know how to do that. So this gives all of our students a chance to develop their self-awareness of their own social needs. The next category, oh, this is a picture of some of our kids actually utilizing this bench from the Sharks. The next category is self-management. At BUB, the pictures are coming up. We have what we call the Rainbow Road. It's a communal space and there's different reasons to use this road. In this picture, you see a teacher leading her class down it as a directed path. But what I want to focus on is this year we had a student who was having a really difficult time separating from his parents and getting into class. It was taking a really long time. So our coach spent time taking this student down the Rainbow Road, and within a week, he was entering class on his own and needed no more assistance. And in the next pictures, you'll see that the Rainbow Road goes throughout the entire campus. So there's different ways to use this. The next category is relationship skills. And so one of the ways that I have tried to bond with the students at BUB being a new principal is jokes with me. This was me doing it with a 4th grade class. And laughter is a great way to get through some of the anxiety that kids may feel at school. The kids really enjoyed it. It was actually really funny. I spent time telling them jokes. They spent time telling me jokes. So it was a lot of fun. One of the things we also do is we have a welcome week the first 3 days of the first week of school. And during that time, there are challenges that happen, and big buddies, which are older students, meet their little buddies from the very start. And this helps both of the age groups, all the students learn self-management skills, and then they continue to develop those throughout the year. So here you see that this was an activity this year for the big buddies. We're showing the little buddies how to use our play structures. In this activity, this is the big buddies reading to their little buddies. And this really gives both parties an opportunity to show off their skills. The big buddies get to read and feel very important, and they get to teach the little buddies different ways of possibly pointing out character traits or how to retell a story in their own words. In this next slide, we also have the buddies in a welcome week challenge together, a challenge game. The next one is responsible decision making. So in this one, you'll see this is the beautiful peace tree that we have at BUB. And actually the peace tree is used for many different things. Kids go there at recess. Sometimes kids just like to sit there and relax and chill out. It also brought about a little bit of historical research on my end. So it's been there for a while. And in 2011, it was possibly going to be removed to have the canopy that's behind it put up. So this had the students come together and get a petition signed so that the tree was not removed. So it promoted this decision making. The last thing I also want to talk about is our walkathon. It's an entire community event. This was my first walkathon, and it was amazing. And there are so many different interactions across age groups and diversities, and everybody came out to participate. And here, these are kids making the decision to play respectfully with one of our lunchtime activities, these big Legos under our peace tree. And this is our school mascot, Captain Cub. And this year he came to do autographs, and they treated him like he was a celebrity. They had such a blast. There was a line to get an autograph from him. And for our walkathon, the PTA comes up with a theme. The design that you see here was done by a student. Our theme this year is Together Everyone Achieves More. And with our social emotional learning, it does take our whole entire community, everyone, to make sure that we do achieve everything that we deserve to achieve at BUB. So thank you for having me here tonight.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm just going to open it up to trustees. Trustees, any questions before we go to public comments? Yes, Trustee Ching.
Thank you for the presentation, and to the students. That was really amazing. The Peace Path and then the Big Buddies, two of the things you mentioned, are those things that that BUB as a school site found? Are those things that are done at multiple school sites based on kind of like suggestion from the district, or how did those two programs come to BUB?
So it's my understanding that once like the pandemic happened and then we came back and we saw that social emotional learning was a bigger issue, I would give the credit to Principal Cindy that I believe she found Soul Shop, found different topics. Last year, there were different topics that they had, and we just continued that this year. And so as far as I know, it's not a district thing, but it's a BUB thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. How do students, new students, kindergartners, how do they learn the conflict resolution steps? Do they do that with their buddies?
They do. They do. We also have made it so that if there is conflict, like with younger kids, we do have it so that they know to find an older kid to help them mediate through the path.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I'll move on. If there's anyone in the public that would like to comment on the presentation by BUB, you may raise your hand in Zoom. Seeing as there are none, thank you so much, Principal Kobata, and thank you to Nor and Harry and Danny and Ms. Ryland for coming to present today. Please send them a big thank you from the board. I think they did a beautiful job presenting to us today. And it was so great to learn about the social emotional practices that are happening at your school. It's really terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. We are now moving on to item 3, which is the closed session agenda. Are there any public comments regarding the closed session agenda? Okay. Seeing as there are none, at 6:21, we will adjourn to closed session. 7:04 p.m. The open session of the meeting is reconvened. There was action in closed session. On a motion made by trustee Blakely and seconded by trustee Chang, the board approved unanimously in closed session to approve a compromise agreement with parents of a current student who asserted special education claims against the district. The board approved reimbursement totaling $14,000 for certain related service expenses, and certain attorney's fees in exchange for releases and waivers of legal claims against the district.
And I think they said by roll call names, so you have to read the names of the trustees that approved it, I think.
So I'll just go down the row, okay? Trustee Blakely,
I think, do we vote again or do you just read the names of people who approved it? I think you just read.
okay, I'll just read the names. So it was a motion made by trustee Blakely, seconded by trustee Chang, and trustee Blakely voted to approve, as did trustee Chang, as did trustee Lambert voted to approve, Vice President Conley voted to approve, I myself, President Berman voted to approve as well. It was approved unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. All items on the consent agenda are considered routine and will be approved in one motion. Are there any questions or comments? Are there any questions from trustees about the consent agenda? Seeing as there are none, we'll move on to public comments. Do we have any public comments about the consent agenda? Seeing as there are none, do I have a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Let the record reflect that a motion made by trustee Lambert and seconded by Vice President Conley. The consent agenda was approved unanimously. We will now move on to communications. So trustees, we normally move on with communications and we begin with employee organizations and district committees and superintendent comments, but I feel compelled to make a statement tonight and during this time, as opposed to waiting during board member comments, and I hope that is okay. This is a statement regarding the war between Israel and Hamas and the way that it's impacting our own community here. On the morning of October 7th, 1,400 innocent Israeli citizens, including babies and children, were brutally murdered in a targeted terrorist attack by Hamas. 200 more were taken hostage. It was a horrific day for our Jewish community, a day of evil, barbaric attacks not seen since the Holocaust. Since then, we have seen more casualties of innocent civilians in Israel and Gaza. We stand with you and our hearts break for the pain you are experiencing. In my work with the National Equity Project, I learned a traditional greeting that is used by the Maasai people in Africa that translates, "And how are the children?" Here in Mountain View, the children may be physically safe, but many are not okay. We have families in our district and across our community, like mine, with ties to the region. I know they are suffering. They are deeply worried for their loved ones. Some are mourning the loss of family or friends that were taken from them. I also hear from our community members that they don't feel safe, that there's a feeling of fear similar to what was felt after 9/11 and similar terrorist attacks. We are troubled by a rise in hate-based acts across our country and even here in our very own community. There is a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. However, even before the recent tragic events, our school district has been working hard to root out the seeds of hate in Mountain View. Our teachers will receive anti-bias allyship training from the Anti-Defamation League in January, and all of our schools are working towards their No Place for Hate designation this year. At the board level, in November 2021, we passed a resolution identifying 1 week in November as United Against Hate Week, while also asserting our resolve to fighting hate and oppression year-round. We've chosen to renew that resolution annually, and I look forward to reaffirming our deep-seated commitment of this work at the next board meeting. Today, however, I use the privilege of my position to denounce acts of terrorism, discrimination, and hate, and to express the board's dedication to creating safe spaces across our schools that allow all students to learn and thrive, free from the threat of hatred and extremist violence. Every child is deserving of that. Dr. Rudolph and our district staff have shared resources for families and staff to support our children at home and school. We also have additional counseling resources available for any student or staff member that are dealing with trauma. I encourage you to reach out to your principal or district leadership. We are here to help. I'd like to conclude with a moment of silence for all the children and families that are experiencing pain, fear, and suffering at this time. Thank you for joining me in a moment of silence. We are truly, truly hoping for better days ahead. Trustee Chang.
Can I make a procedural request that the statement be submitted to the minutes verbatim?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We'll now formally go on to employee organizations under communications. Are there any representatives of employees, organizations who would like to address the board at this time? Seeing as there are none, any district committees, any representatives from district committees that would like to address the board at this time? Okay, then we have Dr. Rudolph, our superintendent.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Just want to give a couple quick updates. Can y'all see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just want to let you know that CAS scores were actually released yesterday. We do plan on bringing those overview of the scores back to the board on November 2nd. That's also when we'll be talking about transportation for choice schools. So both of those will be a big focus for us. Also, as the board knows, I've been on sort of this circuit of a couple conferences, two of the big ones being Chiefs for Change, as well as League of Innovative Schools. And they have all been focusing on AI and sort of its impact on education. And so I'll look forward to bringing back some information about it. I think there's definitely some opportunities for the board to sort of present their case and sort of think about how they envision the use of AI in the district. I also shared with them Trustee Chang, who's on the AI state committee, came up to me afterwards and reminded me that we are in the Bay Area where we have a high number of individuals working on AI initiatives. And so also brought that up, that was one of the things I need to do to reach out to people. The last thing I just want to say, just being at some of these conferences, especially the last one that I'm flying back from right now, I just want to commend the board on their approach to tackling sort of the bigger issues. It was real interesting to hear superintendents talk about how do they focus in on teacher retention and teacher housing. So one superintendent in Colorado Springs was actually talking about it, like how do I convince city council that this is an issue that we should be engaged with? But also hearing people talk about salaries and even literacy, right? And so I think at times, because we're sort of at the tip of the spear or sword, we sort of forget that we are tackling issues as they come. So it was really refreshing to hear those. So I look forward to providing the board for more substantive update on the conferences, but also just wanted to commend them for the work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Dr. Rudolph. Enjoy the rest of, well, it sounds like the conferences are over. Okay, we are going to move on now to community comments. This is a time reserved for community members to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board and the administration welcome this time to listen. However, in compliance with the Brown Act, the board is not permitted to take action on non-agendized items. If you're a member of the public, you please turn in we have a couple of cards already. Former Trustee Nelson, we have a community comment card that was submitted right before yours, so I'm going to go in order that they were received. So thank you. No, it's not on. We have Mike. You'll help me with. Yes, thank you. We have Mike Limutzig.
Good evening, board. I just wanted to introduce myself as I am the new labor relations rep for CSEA. So again, Mike Lynn Utzig. I look forward to working with you and to support your wonderful students who did a beautiful job with Soul Shop this morning. Thank you.
Great. Nice to meet you. Thank you. We have another public comment by retired trustee Steve Nelson.
Thank you, current president. To the other highly segregated schools in our district are Castro and Imai. Trustees, the Castro SED numbers were 236 students. This is why that school has Title I. It's almost 15 times the number at Imai, which is 16 from the latest data we got last month. So 15 times difference in the number of poor students at Castro compared to Imai. If you look at the average teacher salaries, you see an unfortunate situation that the Castro average is about $5,000 less than the Imai average. It's unsure whether that has to do with longevity. It's probably that because the boost for a master's is only $2,000, I think, because still. But trustees, much peer-reviewed economic research shows teacher academic effectiveness depends on how long they've been in their job and doing teaching. So it's unfortunate that the school with the highest need students actually seems to have the average less teacher experience. Another thing you should note, and I haven't seen the latest release on the Smarter Balance, is Castro is only about 1/5 of the students meet state standard. At Imai and Stevenson, it's about 4/5. And that is held steady for, unfortunately, before the pandemic and even now. So this isn't a 1 or 2% gain here or there. This is drastic percentages that aren't making state standard year after year after year after year after year. Can I go into 8 years? Anyway, you get the idea. That public policy of what extra resources are done to Castro is your responsibility, and this is on you.
We don't have any further public comments in person. Let me check on Zoom. Okay, I have three comments. We will have 3 minutes each. We'll begin with Lori Brody. Ms. Brody, we'll put up 3 minutes on the timer.
Okay, just want to make sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, thank you. First, let me say thank you, President Berman, for that that speech that you made. I appreciate it. I had said something that I had wrote something up that I would like to say anyway, if that's okay.
Yes.
Trustees and district staff, thank you for allowing me with this opportunity to speak. My American name is Lori Schertzer Brody. My Hebrew name is Zipporah Rachel. I grew up in a very Jewish community in New Jersey. My public high school was approximately 80% Jewish. That was all I knew. Today, I am raising Jewish children in a place and time that is not Jewish friendly. We are surrounded by anti-Semitism and in a community where we are the significant minority. The superintendent's email last week to the district's community regarding the Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel was significantly lacking. He wrote, like the terrorist attack by Hamas was a playground scuffle. It is not. This is a terrorist attack against Israel and the Jewish people all over the world. Hamas beheaded babies, raped women, killed innocent lives, used kidnapped children and the elderly as shields. Hamas is not human. Hamas is pure evil. They are terrorists. There are no two sides. Either you support Israel or you support terrorists, therefore being Hamas themselves. President Biden, Governor Newsom, local and state officials, Governor DeSantis, New York City's Mayor Adams have publicly and loudly condemned the attacks and stated they support Israel and the Jewish people. Will you take a stand? Be loud. Let others hear you. Say, we stand with Israel and we condemn terrorism. And in conclusion, I'd like to say thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to a revised and more strongly worded email from the superintendent to the school community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brody. We have a second speaker. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Efrat Kayat. You have 3 minutes on the timer. You can unmute yourself when you are ready.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address you, and thank you, President Berman, for your comments. I'm also here for the same topic as Lori, anti-Semitism. I guess I'll try to keep it to the point, although I'm very emotional, as you can appreciate. I'm an American, Israeli, and Jewish, and so are my kids. I have 2 kids in that school. Our identity is our community, and for our kids, this means the school and the district. And therefore, I think, you all know that you have a role as community leaders. And what happened on October 7th is a terror attack. So regardless of the information you have or the opinion about the conflict that is really complex and long, that Saturday act was pure terror. And that was defined by the world's greatest leaders, as well as many of the business world. And I think it should be simple, even though I appreciate schools not getting into politics. This is outside of anything that you could define as politics. And I would like to ask you to reconsider. And the words that you shared here today were heartwarming and with a lot of support and empathy. And I want our entire community to hear that. I think staying silent is not an option. When the world was silent in Germany 70, 80 years ago, it did not end well. And I mean, I'd like to recognize Principal Cindy, the prior principal, when we had graffiti of anti-Semitism in the school a few years back. That same morning, the community received an email very clearly to condemn those types of behaviors and hatred and discrimination and anti-Semitism, including action items on how we add security to make sure that kids are safe and how we train the teachers around that. I would love to see the same level of communication, as well as extra security procedures, because I'm sure you've seen in the news, there are some kids who are being exposed to materials or being convinced that anti-Semitism is a legitimate part of freedom of speech. And if you've followed what happened in San Francisco today, there was a group of kids walking around the hallway of a high school here in San Francisco, calling for basically to get rid of the idea of Israel and let the Palestinian people win, which is horrific. Promoting and supporting terror organization is illegal and wrong. And I know you'll find the heart to help us and support the community with stronger communication. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We have one final hand up. Inbal Lev, you have 3 minutes. You can unmute yourself when you are ready.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Thank you. So thank you, first of all, President Berman, for your very thoughtful words. My name is Inbal Lev. I am the mom of Danny, who was just an hour ago, one of the above fifth graders who very innocently presented the peace treaty to you. My kids were born here. They are American Israelis. And I am actually here to say that we are not okay and we do not feel safe. My kids keep asking whether such horrid events could happen to them here in Mountain View just for being Israelis and Jews. And I like the words. We are with heavy hearts following the anti-Semitism raising its head in schools and universities in our area. We came here with fantasies of, we moved continents away to the Bay Area in fantasy of finally feeling safe. As boards of trustees, as leaders of our community, you have the responsibility to ensure our kids' feeling of safety. When terror is not being called out for what it is and it's not condemned as such, and I refer to the superintendent's email to the community, which was then echoed in the Bub newsletter, which my kids have access to. My daughter reads it. Even after emails sent by community members asking for a revision, we worry even more. The Fremont, Sunnyvale, and Saldos districts have revised their message to the community and sent a clarification email. And we are looking forward to the same from MVWSD for all parents who are not here in the meeting and have listened to the president's very, very thoughtful and kind words. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Lev. And thank you for joining us tonight with your daughter. She did a wonderful job.
Thank you. She did.
Those are the end of our public community comments. We'll move on tonight with item 9, review and action. Our one and only item is off schedule 4% payment.
Trustees, for your approval tonight is a 4% off schedule payment for teachers classified and represented in management. We're able to offer this due to our financially conservative budgeting, and we are in the 3rd year of our multi-year agreement with both units, and we want to honor the work that our staff has been doing.
Trustees, are there any clarifying questions? Okay. With that, I will move on to public comments. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment on this item?
Yes, I'd actually like to comment on the,
One moment, I'm just going to get the timer up.
oh,
Do
sorry.
you have do we have a speaker card for this one?
Nope,
Okay,
this is spontaneous.
okay, just, we will get a speaker card for you, but we will allow 3 minutes on the clock.
Look on your thing, I think it'll be less than a minute. I'd like to remind you when the chief business officer talks about your conservative budgeting, part of the reason of the back and forth with the city and the city administrators are you guys are keeping so much of your budget in a slush fund that isn't allocated specifically for emergency fiscal things. There's a specific fund number that money goes into. You're not doing that. So when you have $34 million and at the start of the next year, it ends up being $36 million. A long time ago, when Bill, Christopher, and I were on the board, Christopher brought up the thing of why do we have so much money stored in reserves when there is so much need. So I don't call myself a fiscal conservative anymore, because sometimes that means, I think, reactionary spending, not on kids in minorities that need it.
Trustees, are there any comments? I guess my comment is just a quick clarifying question with my comments. I'm just incredibly grateful that when we have an opportunity to give additional pay to our staff, that we can do so. I recognize that living in the Bay Area is a stretch for many people in our district. We thank you for your work. We're so thankful for your commitment to working in our district and serving our students. I wonder too, with this 4%, this is not money that we can count on year after year. Is that correct? This is not part of our general operating budget.
That's correct.
So this is a one-time, we've had these extra funds, and we're able to give this as a special one-time payment to our employees. Any other comments from? Thank you. Do we have a motion?
You did have a
No.
comment? Oh, sorry, you had a comment. That's why.
Oh, okay, Trustee Blakely.
I just want to say, I feel like our staff is incredibly deserving, and I'm really glad that we can recognize them in this way. So echoing what you said, but I don't think a lot of school districts are in this position where they can reward their teachers and staff, and I'm grateful that we are.
Okay. With that, do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Trustees approve the one-time payment as presented.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Right, on a motion made by Trustee Lambert, seconded by Vice President Conley, the board has approved unanimously a one-time payment as presented. We will move on to item 10, reviewing discussion. Our one item is equitable access to choice schools lottery update with Director Pullman.
Good evening, trustees. It's nice to be able to join you again to talk about this topic. Let me go ahead and bring up my screen here with my presentation. There it is. Okay, excellent. I also have Kate Fletcher here, and she's helped with the tabulations and the calculations. So if you have any questions about that, she's here to answer those questions, along with myself, who's learned a ton in this process. Thank you, Kate. All right. So from the beginning, this has always been kind of the goal or the challenge that we've been trying to overcome, addressing the underrepresentation of our underserved student populations at our choice schools, considering, of course, the legal, social, logistical, and fiscal challenges. And it certainly hasn't been a simple issue. For the goals and objectives for tonight, we're really just going to reorient ourselves to the previous work that we've been doing, talk briefly about what we learned from year one, introduce the calculations that were made and updated for this year based on last year's applicant pool and district data, and then consider some changes, or rather refinements, based on Board of Trustees feedback that we've received in the past. Okay, so I'm going to quickly cover kind of the following few slides, only because you've seen this information before. The first one, obviously, we use socioeconomic status as a race neutral proxy to determine or factor the distribution of weights to applicants, because socioeconomic disadvantage, or SED, is a federal indicator and not specific to our particular community. We also hoped to capture some of those families at the margins and who may be living in poverty in our community by creating the SED level 2, or what we've come to call RSED, relatively socioeconomic disadvantage, and to factor them into the lottery as well. These thresholds were based on census data taken from the American Community Survey for 2021. Later on in this presentation, you're actually going to see the updated data from 2022, and we're also going to recommend that we further localize the data used by considering the Mountain View Wistman School District census tract, as opposed to the Mountain View City census tract that we used previously. So you'll see those updated amounts as well. We didn't change everything about the lottery, of course. In fact, we use a modified tiered approach, so it kept some things the same. We retained the sibling priority. Of course, we retained the element of chance based on board feedback about choice schools being specialized environments that parents choose to opt into. So we kept a few things the same. The weights were calculated based on what it would take to weight students so that the applicant pool most closely resembled the district average. Socioeconomic disadvantage district average did go up from last year. You'll see later on in this presentation. And so there are some figures that have changed just based on district averages and of course the applicant pool from last year. Here are the weights for the student groups calculated. So socioeconomically disadvantaged level 1 students received a weight of 400, meaning what if 400% of what a typical student would have received. The calculations for RSED, according to the policy, were SED -1. So therefore, they were given a weight of 3 or 300%. And it was already anticipated per board policy that these were going to be reevaluated every year so that they were flexible to the changing environment. So our key takeaways from year 1, overall, our applications to Stevenson increased by 12%. At Stevenson, SED students made up more of the applicant pool and more students offered seats than they were the previous year. So it was an improvement from last year, albeit slight. Amongst kindergarten applicants, good news there, all of the socioeconomically disadvantaged students that applied were offered seats. The same was also true for 4th grade students that applied, where 19 seats were available, 3 SED students applied, and they were all seated. Okay, so now we go into some new information. So I'm going to go a little bit slower and we can take our time here. This is a walk through the same process that we used last year, just with updated numbers. So just to give you some context, the only difference that you'll see here is not in the process, it's actually in the percentages used. So previously our enrollment target was 27% SED based on district average. Based on last year's data, we're updating that average to 30%, which is of course an increase from last year. Now at Stevenson during last year, 9% of the applicant pool, up from 8% the previous year, were socioeconomically disadvantaged. So we made the decision, of course, that they're still underrepresented. So weights for SED and RSED per the board policy would again be applied for next year. The next step, and you've seen this before as well, we determine the appropriate weights. So per the applicant pool and the district target, a weight of 5 would be recommended, adding 4 more entries into the lottery for SED students. This figure is familiar. It's that 400% that you saw last year. So based on our calculations, it would be the same weight applied this year. This brings SED applicants closest to the district average of 30%, keeping the weight, of course, a whole number. When we consider RSED, if the policy were left unchanged, that weight would then be 4, or 300% of what a typical student would retain in the lottery. And that's SED -1. So we'll revisit the weights in a later slide too, just so you get a really clear representation of what it will be. But this is the process if it were to go unchanged. So some refinements to the lottery are really recommended just based on board feedback pertaining to the speed of change that we've seen, the magnitude, and then of course, how local or how specific we are with the indicators and the data that we're using to target the populations and the changes that we're hoping to see. So this is an overview of the changes. We're going to be talking about the data points that we use from the American Community Survey. And we're also going to be talking about the weights assigned to the RSED indicator in order to amplify the weights for SED students and established almost a threshold for using the RSED indicator. We'll go into those in depth, each one at a time. The first change that we're proposing is updating the census data from 2021 to 2022. Of course, that's just based on newly released data. We did see a rise in median income. No matter if you use the metropolitan city census data or Mountain View Westman School District data, there was still an overall increase in median income for both categories from 21 to 22. We can use Mountain View Western School District census tract data as opposed to Mountain View City. It's slightly different. It's not hugely different because the numbers had increased from last year. We're still going to see an increase in the threshold no matter whether we use Mountain View City data or the Mountain View Western School District data. We are proposing, of course, to localize the data and to use that particular threshold. So the Mountain View School District threshold would be half of the median income, so 105,000 approximately would be the new threshold. The predicted effect, of course, no matter what data point you use, we saw an increase in income. If we were to apply this year's threshold to last year's data, we could see anywhere between 1 and 14 fewer families would have qualified under the RSED indicator, not the SED indicator. That would have been no change. And then also based on board feedback, there was some concern about the RSED indicator and the possibility that if we were to get a flood of RSED applicants, it could potentially dilute the field for our SED applicants. So my amazing partner, Kate, also, she did 2 mock scenarios, or actually a lot of mock scenarios. We've displayed 2 here for you tonight, but basically mimicking an event in which there was a flood of RSED applicants, given the current size of the applicant pool. And so there is evidence, as shown by both of these examples, that if there were a flood of RSED applicants, it could dilute the power of the SED advantage, right, by flooding the field with RSED applications. The first example is going from RSED applications increasing from 90 to 125 with the same number of applicants, right? And then the SED apps would represent 22%. And again, the threshold that we're aiming for is the district average at 30%. So that would be below the district average in terms of what they represented in the applicant pool. That number would continue to decrease the more RSED applicants that we had with the same total number of applicants. So for this reason, we are proposing a slight change. And that change is actually based on our ability now, because we've started collecting the information, to approximate the district average for a relative socioeconomically disadvantaged. So change 2 would be to initiate a process where we would use actually the same process that we use to calculate the weights for socioeconomically disadvantaged families, we would now use to create a weight for relatively socioeconomically disadvantaged families. So we would use the district average, just like what we do with SED, right? And then we would look at what weights were needed to apply in order to make our RSED pool mimic the district average. The predicted effect in the previous lottery, this change would have reduced chances for RSED applicants, resulting in fewer RSED families receiving priority. It would not have affected SED applicants at all because there were so few. Now, if more SED applicants were present in the past, it could have resulted in more SED applicants obtaining an advantage or less. I think that's what I meant. So it wouldn't have affected anything from last year other than the RSED applicants because we didn't have a flood. But in the event that we do, this would be kind of a stopgap or guardrail to keep that from happening, to preserve the advantage that our SED students would have. So I'm going to take you through the process of establishing or determining the weight for an RSED. And again, you're going to notice this is the exact same process that we use for SED determination. We determine first an enrollment target. And the enrollment target of 20% RSED is based on district average. Of course, RSED is technically a composite indicator, right? It shields or it hovers over SED plus RSED. And at the district level, approximately 51% of our families are RSED, which is SED plus RSED. So when you isolate just the RSED, you've got a 20% approximation of RSED families only in our district. At Stevenson during last year's, 18% of the applicant pool were RSED. So that would mean that RSED students were still underrepresented. So the weights for SED and RSED would be applied in that case. So not only are we determining weights based on a targeted measure, but we're also introducing a threshold. So if we wouldn't necessarily need to use the RSE indicator if it didn't apply. So per the applicant pool, if we were to use this updated method, a weight of 2 would be recommended, adding 1 more entry. essentially making 200% of what a typical student would receive. This brings RSED applicants in the applicant pool close to the district average of 20%. Unchanged in our previous policy, the RSED weight would have been 4, an additional 3 more entries into the lottery. So if you do decide to go with this updated method, right, it will have an effect on the RSED weights for families this upcoming school year. It will not have any notable effects that we know of on SED families for this year based on the applicant pool that we've seen. So just as an overview, so we can get all the numbers here in one place, with updated calculations and also based on the modifications or revisions that we are suggesting for the RSED indicator, going forward into this upcoming season, there would be a weight of 5, adding 4 more entries into the lottery for every SED student. And there would be a weight of 2, adding 1 more entry into the lottery for every RSED student. Taken together as whole numbers, these weights would bring us closest to the district averages of 31% SED and 51% SED plus RSED in the applicant pool. Of course, it's important to kind of measure our options against one another. The change to the RSED definition in terms of the data point that we use, of course, it's more accurate. It does, of course, change because the median income has increased no matter what. Some students who would have qualified under last year's, if their income had remained the same this year, would not qualify. Our recommendation is to adopt it because it's updated to 2022 ACS data, and it's also more local in terms of representative of our population. That, of course, would be reflected in board policy language moving forward, which would be brought to the board at a separate time. And then the second change that we're proposing is the weights applied more targetedly for our RSED students and not arbitrarily, like SED -1. This ensures that socioeconomically disadvantaged students, of course, will never be flooded. Their applications will never be diluted, no matter how many RSED applicants we have. Of course, one of the downsides, it's a little bit more complicated. Again, we can revise some of the policy language, and that can be brought to the board at another time as well. My recommendation, of course, is to adopt the revised policy just to improve, make sure that it's a stopgap, make sure that that it's a little bit more targeted in terms of the goal that the board has expressed. So in order to honor the board's vision, transparent, flexible, data-driven process prioritizes increasing access to choice programs for SED families, we make the following recommendations: that we update the ACS data to 2022, and also that we use the Mountain View School District tract, not the Mountain View City tract. And then weights for RSED are actually going to be calculated based on district averages to prevent an oversaturation of RSED applicants in the pool in case in the future that were to happen. And this, of course, at the same time establishes a trigger for the use of the RSED indicator. Is only used when the SED indicator is used as well. So it kind of makes them a package deal. So the next steps, of course, this would involve bringing to the board again some changed or updated policy language. And we'll come back to the board, of course, to present that updated policy language before rolling out the lottery to families and all of the information that we send for the school year 24-25 that really kicks into high gear in November. So we'd be able to bring it to you before then. So thank you so much. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. And Kate is here to answer questions if you have any quantitative questions you'd like to ask as well.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you for the presentation tonight. Let's see, trustee questions. I have one from trustee Lambert.
Sure. Just to remind everybody, I was not on the previous board when this was first discussed. So I have probably lots of questions and maybe just going backwards. So why are we going through the process of all this waiting in the first place? For example, wouldn't one just say we want 30% of the students to be SED to reflect the district and make those positions available for those students and fill them up with, 30% of SED students, and the same for the RSED or whatever other kind of bucket where, we whatever any other kind of distribution we want to meet, rather than going through all of this weighting and sort of analysis.
So it's a great question, Trustee Lambert. At the time, the board wanted to preserve the lottery. And so the process that you're talking about actually requires for you to reserve 30% of the slots and then fill them and then open back up to a lottery. And at the time when we discussed it, it seemed like the best option would be to wait it.
Okay, let me follow up with.
Oops, sorry. The other factor, Trustee Lambert, that came up in board discussions at that time was the fact that it was a choice program with specific facets that made it more desirable for certain families, just based on the programming available at that school, such as dual immersion and or PBL SEL at Stevenson.
So then as a follow-up question, if you get the weighting right and the, certain number of you sort of make a good judgment of the number of applicants, the different pools, and get the weighting adjusted and the income, is that right? Theoretically, next year you could reach your goals in the next class for that entering class.
It's always a possibility.
I just want to remind the board that the most likelihood for changing the impact of the school is actually through kinder registration, where the most vacancies are. And so it probably would take a little bit more than a year, even if you were to make the whole class underrepresented students. It would only bring you close to like 20-something%. So this is a multi-year sort of approach in order to get there.
Can I keep going? All these are good
Yes.
answers.
Yeah, by all means.
So how many years do you project this will take until we reach have Stevenson reach the targets that the district is looking for using this process?
We don't have a particular number of years projection. It really is based on the applicant pool. Because the sibling priority is retained, it does reproduce what we see in the applicant pool in terms of seats. So we would have to see dramatic increases or decreases in the applicant pool in order to make a projection in a number of years.
And you're sort of answering my next question is what would it take to, really, let's say do 2-3 years? That what you need to do is increase the applicant pool of the SED students primarily. It looks like you've increased it a little bit. What would it take to increase it a lot, in your opinion?
I mean, what would it take to increase the population, or what would it take to increase the applicants?
The applicant pool for SED students, and that would help basically get them, say, call it a reservoir of children, SED children ready to go into Stevenson.
Well, based on focus groups that we did conduct with preschool families and TK families a couple of years ago, we asked about the barriers and constraints in terms of getting families over to Stevenson. And a few of the things that they mentioned were things like, obviously transportation was one of them, but proximity to home was a really, it's a big factor in terms of why people choose to send their kids to different schools. There's, of course, community perception of, it being somewhat exclusive, or wanting to go to a school where you felt more in community with people who either spoke your native language, were from your native country, or who felt more in communion with. So if we were to target areas for improvement, it would be to address kind of all of those levers for change simultaneously, a lot of which we've done through some of our outreach. And of course, we've seen measured changes.
Thank you.
Vice President Conley.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Director Pullman. And I apologize, I should have sent this in written format ahead of time. I've been parsing through it, just trying to figure out if I were to have a table of the applications from this last year with the SED, the RSED, the number of applicants broken out by grade level, and then the number admitted by grade level from those groups, and then their total percentage. I know that for kinder, in the questions it was asked, how many, there were 72 seated in kinder, with 15 of those being RSED and 8 being SED students. But I also see in the report that there were 47 SED applications total this year. Is that correct? Was that all for kinder?
No, that was not all for kinder.
Okay, so how did those break out?
You know, I know that we had, I could get those numbers to you exactly. I do know that kinder and fourth grade had the largest openings. And in fact, there were relatively few, very few, if none, in any other grade level. Although families do tend to, as we've seen in the past, stay on the waiting list or reapply every year. So you're going to see, you know, families of all different shapes and sizes apply. Unfortunately, even if they're SED and they're applying in a grade level that has no openings, then there's zero chance of admittance.
I mean, was that something that we saw a lot of SED students applying for, let's say, second, third, and fourth grades? Or were they a majority kinder?
Majority kinder and fourth grade.
Okay, because you know, if we assume, let's say 30 of these SEDs, I would really like those numbers, but if we assume we had 30 SED students apply and only 8 of them got in, that's problematic, which, you know, it's why we're having this discussion tonight. But those numbers would actually be really helpful because we have all of these theoretical examples, but we don't actually have the same data for what happened this year.
We did provide it in a board presentation on enrollment in last April, but I'm happy to get you the updated information to you. I do know that all of our kindergarten SED applicants that applied were seated.
Okay, thank you.
And the same thing occurred in fourth grade. So while I know there's a question about the numbers, I would say that if there was a vacancy, that the likelihood of them getting in was extremely high compared to their peers. We'll pull the numbers, but the 2 spots we have vacancies were kinder always, and then fourth grade.
Trustee Chang.
Thank you. 2 questions. First is that just by the number of students who are SED students who are admitted now under the new policy, and then students that were admitted before we had the policy, just because I see in the reports we have the percentages, but then what's the number of like how many students were admitted before we made the policy change, and how many SED students were admitted before, and how many now?
I don't have that information off the top of my head, but I can certainly get it to you.
And then, well, because we could do, I mean, I guess we could do this. I mean, I could do it off the pencil thing. Could you just remind us again what was the percentage of SED students before we made the policy change, and what is the percentage of SED students after the policy change? Because right now, I see the report was it's 11% for kindergarten, right? Is that my? I'm just seeking kind of. There's been a lot of percentages numbers put around. So I'm just trying to get because it's a important data point. And then maybe as that question is being looked up, for informing socially economically disadvantaged families about the different unique aspects of choice programs. What's being conveyed to SED families on why apply to a choice? Well, I guess Mr. Hall is pretty specific, but for Stevenson, there's a lot to it. So like, what is being communicated on what Stevenson is about for families who are SED?
Director Pullman, go ahead and calculate the numbers.
Yeah, I've got them.
Okay. So we actually do targeted approaches for the students. So we held at the preschools, both, and then also at Castro and Third Call. We actually held events where we brought parents as well as staff members out there. So we shared that information last year. We've updated all of our videos. So to better describe what actually takes place in the school. We've also asked each school to do, and this is one of the things we learned when we talked with principals on the action after review, just that we asked the school sites during the enrollment period and the kinder nights to inform parents about what, the choice schools offer. And they sort of felt like at times that was sort of conflicting because while they're trying to champion a neighborhood school, they're also selling a choice school, but each principal gladly did that. And then we also send out targeted information to each one of the sites about the benefits of both choice schools. So we do, last year we unveiled, and we can send all the information back out, but we unveiled a new approach to addressing this, which I think helped with the spike. But I also think that there's, similar to what Director Pullman said, there's a couple other things that we still have to tackle to help to try and sort of stem the tide for this.
So if I was a parent, if I was in a SED family, why would I consider Stevenson versus my neighborhood school? Like, what is the difference?
Well,
Like for Mistral, I can understand this. It's, you have a different language, but like I'm just trying for us to understand. So what would be communicated to a family or to the board on why would a family consider Stevenson over their neighborhood school?
I could have, Principal Lambert speak to this as well, but generally we encourage families to go to whatever school they feel, would fit their kids the best. And obviously, if you want a dual immersion program, you would go to Mistral. If you wanted, to take part in the parent participation model and the PBL and the SEL work that's over at Stevenson, that's something that you would want to do. But I also kind of want to remind all of us too that we don't want to dictate where a family sends their student. We just want to do everything we can to remove barriers. And that's really, where we need to focus too.
I would also say, Trustee Chang, one of the challenges that we're working with the Stevenson community on is that some of the language that we use, like when we talk about project-based learning, that is a very, sort of specific experience that relates to how much social capital a family has. And when you talk about an alternative approach to learning, it could be also possible that those things don't necessarily translate over to individuals who are focused more on, I want to be in community, or I want my child to be close to the school or something else. So we've been partnering with Stevenson to sort of address those concerns too, because those are some of the things that we got from the feedback. But then at the same time, also addressing these other things. ELOP has definitely been a big sort of godsend that will help address the after school. We, at the next board meeting, we'll be talking about transportation, and bringing that back, because we have done that actually before. And then continue to do outreach as well as working with the Stevenson community to talk about how they brand the schools. But I think it is possible that while there are some parents who understand what they are asking for, at the same time, when another parent hears it, it could be confusing. And so that is an opportunity to grow for us.
And you mentioned SEL, social emotional learning, project-based learning, and parent participation. Those are all things that other neighborhood schools do those things as well. I mean, we just heard a beautiful presentation of the amazing things above for SEL. So I'm trying to understand, like, the things presented are the things that neighborhood schools do. So as a family, my SED family, why, in helping me have all information to decide this is the right fit for my child, what is it about Stevenson that I'm factoring in and deciding the best fit school?
And I don't know if there's a direct answer for that. I mean, there's so many factors that are coming into play. Like, for instance, we know that most families choose schools because what they hear from other families. So that's part of it, right? We know that when parents are making choices, part of it is about, like, how is my kid going to get to a school and back? And, even if we do offer transportation for kinders, it doesn't necessarily mean that families are comfortable with kinders getting on a bus and riding over, right? So I think, I don't know if is one particular answer. I think, in defense of Stevenson, at their table and when they talk to parents, they do a great job of explaining the things that they do differently. They do highlight some of the activities they do, like Rocket Day and other stuff. Yes, you're right. These are things that could be replicated at other schools. And so I think that's also part of why we continue to work with the Stevenson community to look at how we can communicate what is different in a way that is really easy for everybody to understand, not just one specific population.
Thank you.
Trustee Blakely.
Just one quick question. Thank you for the presentation and for all the data. There's a lot of data there. In the trustee questions that were published today, it said that of the 72 kinder seats for this current school year, 15 of 72 RSEDs were accepted, so 21%, and 8 of 72 SED applications were admitted, so it's 11%. I just want to make sure, so the combination is 32%, like you combine those. Okay, because there's somewhere you're saying you're subtracting it out, and I wanted to make sure. So the overall percentage, if we were looking at comparing to our overall school population, would have been 51%. But
Yes,
I don't remember what the numbers were last year, but my recollection is that is a significant increase, something on the order of like 12 or 14%. I know we'll have to go back and look. So it's not there, but it's getting closer. So
Yeah,
I think
and
that
actually
means the policies, achieving the goals that we had set for it.
Vice President Conley.
Yeah, so I pulled up the April presentation, and I think one of the things that's tricky about Stevenson is there can be quite a bit of movement on the wait list over the summer. So, I would still appreciate when this comes to us in the fall that we always have the data represented, because there could have been changes. But in April, we had 45 SED students had applied, 34 were waitlisted, and 11 were seated. And 87 RSED students had applied, 63 were waitlisted, and 24 were seated. It is unclear to me which we have slides in that presentation that look at SED and look at grade level, but don't look at grade level by SED. So I'm not sure, I think the implication is that all of the kinder SED who applied got into kinder. And so some of those might have been for grade levels that didn't have seats that were waitlisted.
Yeah, so I actually just had Kate pull the numbers for you simultaneously while we were listening. And so I can project my screen and share those with you if you like. And you can tell me whether or not this answers your question, if I'm understanding exactly correctly. We'll see.
Well, it's kind of looking at what was our missed opportunity? Like how many, were there students, if we had changed the weights this past year, were there students who would have gotten in? Or if, as trustee
Not
Lambert
SED,
said,
no.
No, not for SED.
No.
Okay.
Every student who was SED that applied got in.
Well, just for kinder and fourth, not for other grade levels.
Correct, because there were no vacancies.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so here is you have the SED apps and then SED seated. The one in K, that's the difference, is because they withdrew.
Well, and I wonder if they withdrew because they had an older sibling that they tried to get in and they couldn't get them in.
There's a potential for that, of course, yeah. And so here's how it's broken down by grade level.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thanks to Kate for pulling that.
Do our SED families who apply to a choice school, they have the opportunity to apply to both choice schools? Is that correct? Or just do our SED families can only choose one?
Any family, regardless, can only choose one at a time.
Okay. I felt like that came up at some point during a board meeting. I just think about the family that's even considering a choice program and wondering, between the two, if they're hearing, there's not a very good chance of getting into one, then they don't risk that one opportunity, right? And then decide to go to perhaps Mistral, right?
Yeah. So we used to allow parents to apply to both, and what we found, and this is probably around 2017, before we made the changes, that it just encouraged families who wanted to get out of the school to apply to both. And so we would have parents who knew nothing about dual immersion, but would show up at Mistral because they got in, and then were upset that, this is the program that they got. And so in order to honor both schools, we really felt like it was important for a parent to actually choose one of the two, because we felt like fundamentally they're two different schools. If it was
Yes.
two dual emergent schools, I think allowing them to apply to both would be something different because the parent is expressing an interest. But in this instance, we felt like it really was something totally different. However, if a majority of the board chooses to open that back up, that you can apply to both, then we'll be glad to make the change for next year.
Thank you for that. Trustee Lambert.
So thank you, Trustee Conley, for reminding us of the data back in April, because I mean, what that data shows is that, 47 applicants sounds great, but the reality is only 11 of those were real, because those were the only ones that had openings in those classes. The rest were just like thrown in the wastebasket. So that's a really, really misleading number. But what it does emphasize is that the issue isn't so much, well, we don't even know yet with the lottery and the waiting. It's you've got to get more applicants, right? In the classrooms, in the classes that you have openings in. And this isn't going to go anywhere unless you have that. So, and I know you put a lot of effort into it. You recognize that going into this a year ago, put a lot of effort into it, and it wasn't very productive, to be honest. So, yeah, something else desperately needs to be done. I mean, I was going to suggest being very aggressive with the weights, but that's not going to help anything if you don't have the applicants. So, yeah, that's right.
Trustee Chang, it's not time for public comments yet. I'm sorry.
Oh,
No.
was that a question that he
No,
asked?
no,
Because I see
no, it's not.
a comment
No,
he was making.
no, we're still in our questions. Trustee Chang.
Just saying if the staff had to follow up on the question of the number of SED students that were enrolled the year before we made the board policy change. Do we have the number? So if it's 11, so if there's 8 kinder applicants after the policy change that were admitted, 11 total, what was the numbers for the year before?
12, oh, so 9%, it's went up to 12%. So 9% of SED students made up the applicant pool the year before, and 12% of students were offered seats, which is an improvement from last year when 8% of applicants were SED and only 5% of the students were offered seats that were SED. So 5%, I think, is the number you're looking
In 22-23, we didn't have the RSED.
Okay, so for the SED
That's
then,
correct.
if we're talking like 9 to 12%, and we're talking eight kinders admitted, are we talking a change of 1 student or 2 students?
1 or 2.
The 1 or 2.
I also want to point out that last year, there were SED students who were waitlisted, whereas this year, had they applied, they actually would have gotten in. So there was substantive change in terms of, making sure that kids don't get waitlisted. The other thing I would just simply say is that also keep in mind that this has a compounding effect, because you do have the sibling priority, which took up almost half of this. Do you remember what the total? I think it was like 40% of the first grade of the kinder slots. And so the kinder priority is also a driving factor, but as students starting kinder and work their way up, the younger siblings will get a higher opportunity, which should hopefully move the dial a little bit more.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think we're ready for public comments. We have a public comment card from retired trustee Steve Nelson.
Yes, thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
Dr. Lambert, for your question/comment. Cutting to the chase, it's the applicant pool. That's the only thing that really matters. This new way of doing things is just fine. But how you get to more SED applicants for K, if you get more applicants for K, 18 to 24, depending on if you have a third or a quarter or a third of SED in the district. If you do that and you can get them in to take their seats with the total 72, in 7 or 8 years, you'll be up to the goal that you want. It's that clear. If you don't have the applicant pool, there is no way you can ever get to your goal. So Trustee Chang, why is desegregation of Stevenson important? Well, I assume you've read a lot of educational research, but if you cram a high percentage of FCD students into the same classroom, it multiplies the effects of poverty and low parent formal education. Now, that's one of the things that can be used to sell this, maybe. But if you can't sell this to the SED parents, you're not going to get that applicant pool that you need. So the federal poverty level are not anywhere near on the margins. These are poor and very poor kids in poor and very poor families, and they represent a third to a quarter of the population in this school. Get real. These are very poor families. Some of them are one family per room in apartments. These are very poor families. They don't have cars. If you don't give them transportation, they will not consider this school. So I have to give credit to the administration. They brought that up to you when they brought this lottery, that one of the two most important things was transportation, free transportation, transportation that works for parents, transportation that actually is going to cost you money, money that maybe you have to take out of that slush fund of what, $38 million now? So you've got to spend money on the poor, or if you're going to help the conditions of the poor. And part of it is you have to be aggressive about recruiting them and telling them what's to be the advantage of 4/5 of the students are meeting standards in this school. Just think, your kid will be able to turn to the kid next to them and they'll probably know the answer and to be able to help. If you're in a school where almost all the kids are turning to the kids next to them, and neither of them know the answer.
Thank you for your comment. Trustees, comments? Yes, Trustee Blakely.
Just a couple of comments. Thank you for the work. I know we've spent lots and lots and lots of time on this. I agree. We've said that transportation is one key factor. And also, I think Director Pullman called it community. I was thinking culture, but sort of school culture and community. Some people don't want to go to Stevenson. They want to stay they want to be with their neighbors or, a more traditional, not that it's that untraditional, but just more like a neighborhood school community. And we can't make people want to do that. I don't know, I'm maybe the only one here, but when the charter school was trying to come to town, Bullis, they were trying to get more low socioeconomic kids enrolled in their school, in part because the county had said they needed it. And they were offering a free summer school that people took advantage of in some of these geographic areas, but the families didn't want to enroll. They didn't feel comfortable there. So I think we need to work on the community and dropping barriers. But to Director Pullman's point, we need to remove barriers, but we can't make people want to go to a particular school. And some will, if we remove the barriers, we won't know until we find that out. And I'm glad that we're going to be talking about transportation and that's a longer term conversation for us. But I think trying to tell people that they have to do something is just not the way to go. I think the community has to want to do it. And the school community needs to be welcoming. And I know that there's been a task force working on that. And like Dr. Rudolph said, some of the outreach to Castro and the preschools is helpful for the families to know that, yes, we want you, but we can't dictate what they do. The other thing that I want to say is I really feel like we should be focusing on the kindergarten enrollment. We need to apply the recommendations at all grade levels, but it's really kinder that's going to eventually move the needle. And I know oftentimes there historically has been a little bit more opening in fourth grade. I think that's when this class size numbers change. And so sometimes there's some openings. Also, sometimes families will move to a different school environment at that grade level. So fourth grade has historically seen a little bit more room sometimes at Stevenson. But I think that we, for the purposes of our conversation and not being distracted by like all these numbers when there's no openings, should really be focusing on kinder.
So there's some direction here, requests for board feedback on considering changes to the lottery.
I am comfortable with the changes that are recommended.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, trustee Lambert.
So I'd like to follow up on some of the things that trustee Blakely said. So I think it's a really important comment to say that, compelling parents to send their kids to certain schools is, a fool's errand here. But the alternative suggests that we should be focusing on making our other schools more attractive so that our ultimate goal here is to really not have segregated schools, which we do. Okay, now we're talking about Stevenson now, but we have issues throughout our district, okay, and that just has to stop. And so, as you're suggesting, indirectly, that offering other programs, other attractive features, transportation, whatever it is, throughout the school district, and allowing choice to occur everywhere so parents are not being compelled, but more like choosing where to send their children is, perhaps an attractive alternative.
Are you suggesting getting rid of the neighborhood schools thing or just?
Well, let's put it, I won't go the next what I'm suggesting, but I think that's a conversation we should be having. Because I'm seeing here just with Stevenson, what we're doing, this is going to be very challenging to do. Okay, even if we had the applicant pool, it's going to take close to a decade. Not acceptable.
Or 6 years.
Well, yeah, I'm just 9 months into it, so right. So that's my perspective. I recommend certainly changing the weights will help, but I would, if Stevenson is what the focus is, we really need to figure out a way to attract, have a larger applicant pool of the SED, and whatever that takes to do that.
Okay. So I've recorded that you are in favor of the changes to the lottery too, that they're suggesting for now, in addition to this other work that needs to be done. Thank you. Trustee Chang.
Thank you. On the recommendations, I support the district's recommendation. Would suggest that this term relatively socioeconomically disadvantaged, just that's not a commonly used term, and I think relatively I would suggest perhaps considering another. I mean, because we're pretty much creating a new category here, expanded SED or something. Relatively, just I don't know. But more importantly, so yes, I would support this change. I am, however, concerned that we've spent I think over 4 board meetings and countless hours and behind the scenes countless staff hours on a policy that in the end really affects 1, 2, 3, 4 at this moment 1 or 2 students. We're talking kindergarten changes. I mean, we're a district of 4,500 students, and I don't think this is a conversation I would have welcomed if this was like a consent agenda item, and we have moved forward and talked about the deeper question of like we need to step back a second and think about what is the purpose of choice programs, and are choice programs reflecting what we as a board and district and community seek as a choice program. I mean, when I've been in this district. I've been in, this is the first place I moved when I started teaching. So that was 19 years ago. I've been somewhat involved in the school district the whole time. And back when Stevenson was created, it was very clear that, it was a small school that was focused on that. It's a place that parents could feel completely supported to be involved, and a place that eventually started to adopt project-based learning and SEL as 2 aspects of that. And when I say adopted PBL, it meant that like kids were doing projects that had community presentations and things like that, and doing reflection processes, and there's very specific pedagogy tied to PBL that Stevenson was an early adopter, and in SEL, parents were trained on how to support the kids when they would volunteer in their classrooms. But now Stevenson is our largest elementary school in our school district by large numbers. but by large numbers. And then also, we're talking about increasing socioeconomically disadvantaged families, which is a worthy goal because all our schools should reflect the demographics of our community. But we also have to think, well, why do we want families to go there? Isn't the point of choice schools is that families start going there because they think that school has a pedagogically unique focus that's good for their child? And we have to not lose sight of that, right? Like they choose Mistral because they want a second language. And if they choose Stevenson in the past, it was because they wanted to be really hands-on in their school, right? And that was when it was a small school. And we have a lot of people at this table who have deep experience in Stevenson, a former principal, a former educator at Stevenson. And I just, I wish we kind of actually, instead of getting into the weeds about diving into changes that affect 1 or 2 future kindergartners, of us stepping back and go, what is the impact of choice schools on our school district when our choice schools are largest school in the system? How does that, does it have the same kind of negative impacts that charter schools have? And this board has done a lot of research into why they didn't want a charter school in this district. Because in the end, if parents are going to Stevenson because they want to be involved in their kids' school, then we should find ways to ensure that all schools feel even more welcome. And I believe they are. And if they aren't, we should look into that. And if the question is they want SDL, well, we've been doing so much work on SDL. And if they want more, we should be doing more. And if they want PBL as a pedagogical focus instead of what they think their neighborhood school is doing, then we should be doing more of that. I have been always a major advocate of Stevenson. It's the school I know the most, school I've spent the most time at. Yet now that it's our largest school, I'm kind of lost on what is the purpose of Stevenson in our school system. There was one time Stevenson was thought of being a laboratory school, the same way charter schools were meant to be designed, as in they do pilots of things that trickle out to other schools. Well, that's certainly not the case, right? Like we don't send teachers to Stevenson, our district, to see what they're doing there. And is it parent participation? And certainly parent participation should never be required because that's unequitable. But are we still saying that that's encouraged? Because I can think it'd be quite disheartening for families who think that parents is a place that parents are engaged, but families show up because they're told that this is where they should apply. Or so I just hope that we can at some point step back and go, why do we have choice schools? Because there is a future, and I don't mean to say that I want to shut down Stevenson, but or Mistral or our 2 choice schools. But you can imagine a future where language is taught in all our schools, right? Because we don't offer Spanish at all our schools. You can imagine a place where SEL, parent participation, and project-based learning are so deep in all our schools that maybe we don't need maybe we don't need choice schools in a long-term future because it has the effect of pulling families away from neighborhood schools.
Vice President Conley.
Thank you. I agree with the recommendations that were presented tonight. I also agree that we need to focus on increasing the applicant pool. I think there's and I don't think people have gone this extreme tonight. So I don't want it to come across as a critique, but I worry about a narrative of we've done everything we can. People don't want to come here. What are we going to do about it? Kind of becoming sort of this soft bigotry of low expectations for what families would choose. And that's if you took the really extreme version of that. And because part of it is we still have work to do identifying what the barriers and also the desires and needs of our SED families, what they're facing and what they want. Kind of tangled up that sentence, but what I hear a lot of times as a parent at Mistral from our Spanish-speaking community is a real concern about reclassification. So has Stevenson show that they can reclassify Spanish-speaking students? Well, not really, because there haven't been very many there. So how does Stevenson make the argument that it is going to accelerate student reclassification and help their students learn English? I'm not saying that's the silver bullet, but that might be a component that we haven't even talked about yet, and we haven't asked families directly about. I'm glad that we have transportation coming back to the board soon. I think that's fantastic. On this broader question about choice schools. You know, I taught at Stevenson. And when I was there, it's been over a decade, so things are not necessarily the same. My experience there was that there was a portion of families who came because they had gone to parent participation or co-op preschools. And so they had experienced a way of being involved in their children's education that they wanted to continue. They often had a stay-at-home parent in the family, but not always, or they had a very flexible work schedule. And so they sought a parent participation program in particular. And there was also a large group of families who came because the test scores were high. And it had nothing to do with the content of the school, but it was because it was one of the highest scoring schools in the district. And Imai and Bub were neighborhood schools, so they couldn't necessarily transfer their children there, but they would transfer into Stevenson if they could get there. There were also some parents with students who might have special needs who were looking for the higher adult to child ratio that you have at Stevenson. I would love a future where we had deep project-based learning at every single school site, but I also think that's at least a decade out. Like to do that and do that well, at Stevenson, the teachers write their own curriculum. They aren't using something scripted. When you really get into the art of it, you are following what your students are interested in and then crafting units around what their passions are. And so it can change from year to year, but always aligned to the California state standards, right? It's like the true art of teaching. It's a joy to be there. It is really, really hard and time intensive. And I was fortunate enough when I was there, I was already an experienced teacher, but there were people who had been doing it for 30 years who really were vision keepers and leaders in the school in training other teachers. So expanding that district-wide would be amazing, but that is a huge undertaking, and we certainly don't have the capacity to do that right now. It doesn't mean I would argue against it. I think it's wonderful, and I think teachers really, really enjoy it too. But it's hard. So I see a value in the choice schools. Stevenson's been used as an outlet, which is why it got so big. It's because when other schools were overcrowded, we opened up more spots at Stevenson because it was flexible. I don't know if that's always the best policy. I don't like that it's the biggest school in the district right now. I agree that that's problematic. But in the grand scheme of things, we have this incredible type of education that's a resource that we want all of our students to have access to, regardless of their income, of their race or ethnicity, of the neighborhood that they live in. And until now, the messaging hasn't been, this is the place for you, please come. It has been, this is the place for wealthy families who can do a parent participation program. And it's a different type of education than what your kid is going to get in traditional school. But that parent participation piece was like, you need to volunteer 2 hours a week. That was such a strong message. And I know that Stevenson worked really hard last year to like reformat the communication and not stress like the parent participation isn't mandatory. And so, kudos to them for working on that messaging. I just think we need to do probably some more focus groups or outreach to figure out, if we knock out this transportation piece, which I hope we do, what else about the actual model itself is a concern for families or would be a selling point for families the families that we are trying to attract.
Okay, well, that leaves me. So I am in favor of the changes that you are proposing to make changes to the lottery and the weights. I think this brought up an opportunity to talk through maybe some other potential concerns when we identify that the target community that we'd like to see applying to Stevenson isn't applying. So therefore, all of these other conversations are coming through. Yes, it's also apparent to me that we need to focus on that kinder enrollment and attracting our SED families or informing our SED families of what those opportunities are at Stevenson, because if we don't have the applicants, this won't change. And I appreciate Stevenson's desire to see their community become more diverse. I think, this was our first year. We're about to go into our second year of this change in the lottery. I think we're looking so closely at what these obstacles are, and I truly appreciate that really in-depth answer that came in the board questions about what those barriers are. Those seemed really right on. So I think that it's clear to us what the issues are, and those are the things that we're going to address and hopefully see a change in the applicant pool, because I think, with that sibling priority, I think we'll see a difference. It's an interesting conversation that we're having about some of our concerns, something we want to keep an eye on. But I'm optimistic that having our finger on the pulse of what our SED community needs from their school to make that school site attractive to them, that will make changes to the way we provide information, the way that we welcome families, the way that existing families welcome families, and hopefully we'll see a shift in the coming year. And it won't happen overnight, but I think I'm optimistic that it'll happen, but in some way, I think it's important to continue these conversations. So, Director Pullman, thank you for the presentation. I'm realizing that I want to make sure I get to public comments. Okay. Oh, thank you. So it was a long conversation. Thank you. So Director Pullman, so overall, the board signals that these changes they were in favor of the changes to the lottery. So that'll come back next time. Okay. Thank you. We'll move on to item 11, board updates. Do I have updates from the board? Yes, Trustee Blakely.
Thank you. Isn't an update, it's really a question, which I maybe should have asked earlier. But when are we supposed to have completed our review of the site plans? And how is the scheduling going to work? Other years we've had like 2x2s with principals, and I haven't seen anything about, I thought we were going to talk about them in early November. But we're supposed to say which schools we wanted to talk to and scheduling, and just trying to figure out how that's going to work and then what the drop dead date is. Because when do they have to be submitted to
do
it?
Yeah, there was a question that was submitted, or not a question, there was a template that was in the report that showed what the timeline was. So there is a final date.
Correct. And I sent in the weekly a couple weeks ago, I sent that you just need to email Ms. Falaba, who will set up the meetings for you.
And is there a timeline? I mean, obviously we need to give her a little advance notice because she needs to coordinate with the principals who are everybody's busy. Is there a timeline then when that process would have been completed, should be completed?
If you email her your availability, she'll work to schedule the sites that you want to talk to.
Right, but does this have to be completed by like November 10th, November 1st? November 15th?
So
Correct.
it's in the October 9th weekly report. It says November 2nd.
Thank you.
Thank you for looking. Okay, Trustee Chang.
Thank you. I have a board update on, as I mentioned earlier, serving on the CSBA AI task force, and there's been a lot of talk. I think a lot of us have received information, and I think it's particularly in the September newsletter and updates about the work that CSBA has been doing in prep for the first task force meeting in December at the CSBA conference. One of the things that they were suggesting to board members is to keep their eyes open for what is happening. And we just heard from our superintendent that AI has been a big talk at the conferences he's going to. So I sent a video to Dr. Rudolph, and there it is. And what the video is about just 2 tools of what's going on out there. These 2 tools are shared with not the recommendation or endorsement or any commentary, nor for us to discuss it, just to kind of show that what is AI? It's such a hard thing to conceptualize unless you see it. One tool was one where I requested them to make a video to show us the demo. The other one is of Sal Khan talking about what Khan Academy Mountain View Base is doing. the other one is just a clip from his recent TED Talk. And I believe he's participating, helping with the CSBA meetings coming up too. So share these videos. It's like 4 minutes without commentary.
We import assignments out of Google Classroom. Then the teacher can pick a rubric to grade with. Then we generate feedback based on the criteria that is on this rubric. Then the teacher reviews everything and sends it back to Google Classroom. And then the teacher can pick one of our rubrics. We have standard rubrics here, or even create a new one. And also add extra instructions on top of the rubric. That's specifically useful if you want to focus the feedback on something. So let's say you are teaching a class about figurative language, and then you want to focus the feedback on the metaphors. You can write that here, and co-grader is going to focus the feedback on that. And after importing data, we get feedback for every kid in a really nice format. Here you have the essay, and this is the feedback. We first use this glow, grow, and action items format so that we always highlight something that was good, something that could be improved, and how to do that. We also provide feedback by criteria. So each of the criteria will have feedback. And then after approving, the teacher can edit this. So if this is not accurate, you can edit it. And then after doing so, finally, it's possible to submit this feedback. So you get it back on Google Classroom. How it comes. So you have the glows, grows, action items, and then here's this for
this clip from Benjamin Bloom's 1984 Two Sigma study, where he called it the Two Sigma problem. The Two Sigma comes from two standard deviations, sigma the symbol for standard deviation. And he had good data that showed that, look, the normal distribution, that's the one that you see in the traditional bell curve right in the middle, that's how the world kind of sorts itself out. That if you were to give personal one-to-one tutoring for students, then you can actually get a distribution that looks like that right. It says tutorial one-to-one with the asterisk, like that right distribution, a 2 standard deviation improvement. Just to put that in plain language, that could take your average student and turn them into an exceptional student. It can take your below average student and turn them into an above average student. Now, the reason why he framed it as a problem was he said, well, this is all good, but how do you actually scale group instruction this way? How do you actually give it to everyone in an economic way? So this right over here is a traditional exercise that you or many of your children might have seen on Khan Academy. But what's new is that little thing at the right. And we'll start by seeing one of the very important safeguards, which is the conversation is recorded and viewable by your teacher. It's moderated actually by a second AI. And also, it does not tell you the answer. It is not a cheating tool. Notice, when the student says, tell me the answer, it says, I'm your tutor. What do you think is the next step for solving the problem? Now, if the student makes a mistake, and this will surprise people who think large language models are not good at mathematics, notice not only does it notice the mistake, it asks the student to explain their reasoning. But it's actually doing what I would say not just even an average tutor would do, but an excellent tutor would do. It's able to divine what is probably the misconception in that student's mind. This is reading comprehension. The student's reading Steve Jobs' famous speech at Stanford. And then as they get to certain points, they can click on that little question, and the AI will then Socratically, almost like an oral exam, ask the student about things. And the AI can highlight parts of the passage. Why did the author use that word? What was their intent? Does it back up their argument? They can start to do stuff that, once again, we never had the capability to give everyone a tutor, everyone a writing coach to actually dig into reading at this level. And you could go on the other side of it. We have a whole workflows that helps them write, helps them be a writing coach, draw an outline. But once a student actually constructs a draft, and this is where they're constructing a draft. They can ask for feedback, once again, as you would expect from a good writing coach. In this case, the student will say, let's say, does my evidence support my claim? And then the AI not only is able to give feedback, but it's able to highlight certain parts of the passage. It says, you know, in this passage, this doesn't quite support your claim, but once again, Socratically says, can you tell us why? So it's pulling the student, it's making them a better writer, giving them far more feedback than they've ever been able to actually get before.
Okay, any other updates?
I wanted to come back to the site plan conversation. November 2nd is 2 weeks from today. Has anybody else made any appointments? I don't know what the statutory deadline is, but I'm wondering if it might make sense to extend that maybe by a week. I don't, if that's possible, or to the following board meeting date. They take a while to review, and then I hate scheduling with Nancy before I've reviewed them, although I may.
And I will say, like in the past, it was something that was discussed at a board meeting. So it was flagged in that format for trustees. And then there were time slots that were available to schedule. And I agree. I'm concerned about getting it done before then.
Okay, I'll work with Dr. Rudolph, see if we can get that extended. Okay. I'll find out. Okay. Just I want to recognize that on Monday is the Santa Clara County Teacher Recognition Celebration. Congratulations to Ms. Erica Valle from Vargas, who will be recognized. All right, there's also the Santa Clara County School Board Association Annual Fall Dinner. That's happening on Wednesday with a student panel on environmental sustainability in schools. Yes.
And I think almost everyone went to the Mountain View Shoreline 40th year anniversary celebration this past weekend that the city put on. There were exhibits regarding Shoreline's past, present, and future. It was a really extensive event, and I think we all enjoyed being there and appreciate being invited.
Terrific. Okay, we have on item 12, we have, make sure there's no public comment on board updates. Okay, seeing as there are none, we'll move on to future board meeting dates. We have November 2nd. We'll be talking about transportation, and we'll also look at our United Against Hate resolution, as I mentioned before, and the November 16th and December 2nd. Okay, and at 8:47 p.m., we will now adjourn this meeting.